Welcome, everyone. I have an amazing guest with me. Her name is Tina Murphy, and in 2013, Tina's husband, Jamie, suddenly passed away, leaving her to raise her two young boys. A loss of her husband led her to turn to online shopping as a to get away from the intense pain. Tina's healing process began to flourish when she learned how to actually process her pain. As she made peace with her grieving process, Tina was able to take control of her spending. She began using her money to buy items that brought her joy, while she also was mindful of her financial future. Tina then made it her mission to support other widows going through the same healing process. With over 25 years of personal finance teaching experience, she created her next level widow coaching program where she guides widows in creating a spending plan so they can enjoy life today while being relaxed about their financial future. Welcome, Tina. Thank you for being here. That is like really cool. What you do is really cool. And I think it's really important. And you want to tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me, first of all. I greatly appreciate it. So grief is something that most people have no idea how to manage. Um, and so learning how to do grief and handle all of these big emotions is a big deal. And so as I was grieving, I was turning to online shopping as just a way to feel better because grief feels like horrible and terrible, and we don't know how to manage all of them because, again, it's not just grief. There's anger, there's sadness, there's resentment, there's every
All the emotions,
all the
right?
emotions. Yeah, like it's all the human emotions that we have to deal with. And so then we layer that on with judgment and shaming ourselves and all that good stuff. And it's just like, how do we deal with this? So, yeah, so it was grief, and turning to shopping is just what quote unquote made me feel better in the moment.
Yeah,
But later on, it didn't last. And so now I know how to allow all the human emotions that we have so that I can start using my money in a way that I like instead of a way to cover up my pain.
I love that. And we all need that, I think, not just as, people that are widows, but all people, because
Yeah.
we use shopping to dull things or to make us happy for the moment. And really, it's so much more to that. And today I wanted to talk about, I gave my money story in the last episode, kind of how I grew up, what I heard in my household, and then what it did to me as an adult,
hmm
and then what I was doing to my children, and then finally being able to break that cycle. So I wanted to hear a little bit about, what did you learn about money growing up? What are some things you heard or saw?
Well, I think that it does play into how I handled my own grief. I think that one, I never saw my mom really do anything with money other than spend it in shopping. And I don't think she did it excessively when I was younger, but that's all I saw her role as. And then my dad was the one that was, managing the money when I was younger. I remember getting money. There was an envelope in our his desk drawer that every day we would go and get lunch money from. And so I think that that was some things that I remember. Um, those were my biggest ones. And then, like in college, or even in high school, like my dad was the one that gave me the money. Um, I don't really remember my mom really talking about money very often, which is interesting because then when I went to college, I decided to be a business teacher. I think that's just because I like my business classes. But then when I was teaching, I loved my personal finance, teaching personal finance to people, to my students and stuff. So I would say those were some of the bigger stories. But I think it's interesting when you start looking at some of your past money interactions, you like see them come up
Mm,
randomly. I think like sometimes we don't even realize things that came up.
yeah. And that's
So,
something I was saying, like, once we become aware, like, "Oh, that's why I do what I do."
yeah.
Like, this is the story I've heard, in our subconscious had picked up that we didn't realize, and this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. But now I either like it or I don't, but
Yeah.
I get to choose now, and I think that's so powerful. So, when did you, realize that, and how do you think it impacted you as an adult?
So I think one of the things, like I said, money beliefs and money stories are constantly coming up. And so, for example, I think that when I was grieving, I was shopping again as a way to feel better. And again, I think that that's what I always saw like my mom do, and my sister and I, we would always just like, as women, we're kind of like taught that we have to go and we shop when we feel bad. And
Right.
so I don't know that that's necessarily like a family belief, but a societal belief, like,
Mhm.
oh, when we're feeling bad, what do we as girls do? We go, even in junior high, we would go shopping with our friends. And so when my husband did pass away, I think that that was one of the things. Like, I didn't know how to thank my friends for the support they were giving me. So I would buy them stuff, and I would, um, take my friends on a trip. And then some of that was because I had, when my husband passed away, I'm like, all I got is memories. So here we go.
Mm,
Um, but I think the more that I dig into things, I'm finding out that past family members, not past family, but other family members, turn to shopping as a way of feeling better. Um, I think I also have noticed like sometimes I worry about money. Like, am I going to have money coming in? And I think I've gotten that from my dad, because my dad would like worry about paying bills. And, even though he didn't hear it, I think that I have gotten that from him. And I can remember him like sitting at the kitchen table and doing bills and all that stuff. And you're just like, now I do the same thing. Like, I go through my spending plan and I sit at a kitchen table and I'm kind of like stressing about it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, I feel like my dad here.
yeah. So funny how we pick up those things from our parents and we find ourselves doing the same things that they did. And yeah. And just like what you said, like that is so important. He didn't necessarily say he was stressed, but you picked up on it.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
picked up on it. And so your parents were obviously not having conversations.
No.
Your mom did what she wanted to do. Your dad paid the bills and tried to make it all work.
Yes. Yeah. And so if we were ever going to wanted any money, we always went to my dad, which I think has, again, as a woman, I have this belief that the men are the ones to make money.
Mm,
And I think that as I have gotten into the dating world again after losing my husband, I'm like, I need to have a man that can like help support me, instead of thinking, well, I can do this. I mean, even though I have the financial knowledge, there is a lot of fear that's wrapped around like making my own money, supporting myself. And it's just very interesting. I think that that's something that I have to work through. It's like it is a different belief that we as women have, and men stress about. Like, we have to
yeah,
be the provider, and as women we are the spenders. And
right.
it is like this. Oh, like how are we dealing with that in our own? And especially for me, and when I'm not married and I'm like, I got to find somebody to quote unquote take care of me. Yeah.
I think you're right, and that's probably something society puts on us, right? Saying, okay, well, women spend money and men make the money. And we, again, just grow up believing that. And as adults now, we're like, okay, how do I deal with this? How do I change those thoughts? And I think it's really cool that just your vulnerability and saying, "You know what, even as a money coach dealing with this for years, I'm still dealing with it."
Yeah.
Like, stuff is still coming up, and, um, it just does. I mean, it's a process just like anything in life, and, we talk about negative thoughts and how we have to replace those. Same thing with our money. We have to continue to pound in something different that was pounded in for what, 20, 30 years. We have to change that. It's not gonna change overnight. It's gonna be a process.
Well, and I think sometimes I don't even know if it's just 20 or 30 years. I think it goes back generational times.
Yeah.
So I think like it was interesting because my mom and I were just talking about this, and she doesn't like to throw, like, if there's a little bit of stuff left over, she has a really hard time throwing something away because she doesn't want to waste it. And I'm
Mm.
like, that's so interesting. Like, where did that come from? And like, when you look at how old she is, and her mom, and mom and dad were raised during the Great Depression, and then her grandparents were like parents during the Great Depression. So I think there's this like, during those particular times, just even going back, what, for me it would be 3 generations back, you didn't waste stuff. You got everything that you needed. You didn't go and, just throw stuff away. And so for her, she has this like, she has to use everything. Everything is like, you have to hold on to it. And I think that has affected me too, because I have this like, oh, I'm wasting money. Like, I catch myself thinking like, I've wasted time, I've wasted money, I didn't use something, and I'm like, ah, well, and I can see that it's like 4 generations back, of family members growing up in a time where you didn't waste stuff because you didn't know when the next um, meal was coming in, or where you go, the food that you had, was it going to last? You had to make it last. And so now we're in a society where I have more than I need, but I fear that that it won't last. So I think that that's like one of the new stories that I'm unfolding of myself, and understanding, oh, that's where that comes from. But then it makes us feel even more intense when we're trying to do something that we love, or we're not enjoying the things that we're doing because we're afraid that we're not going to have enough.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, yeah, it goes back generations because we learned from our parents what they learned from their parents, what they learned from their parents.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it goes back forever, and then little things get put in here and there. And if we're never exposed to anything different, we just keep the cycle going.
And I think it's also, we don't even know. I think even some of it is not even knowing that it's there.
Right.
Like, I don't
Right.
even think, like, before I started getting into the life coaching world, I never knew what like money stories or money beliefs. Like, that's just like a interesting phrase, and like, you we don't really talk about that in, like, even in, I mean, I taught personal finance, and I never talked about like, well, what beliefs do you have about money? Like, what? Like, what are you talking about? We
Right.
just teach kids how to do things, but everyone knows that 1 + 1 = 2. And if you only got $2, then that's all you can spend. But why are we going above and beyond? Why are we doing all of this? And it's such a deeper topic that we just don't even, we just don't know to even look at it. I think some of it's
No,
don't even
totally.
know.
Yes, I'm 100% in agreement with that, and that's one of these reasons I created the podcast, was to open up the conversation, because there's these, money's taboo, money, you don't talk about it, you all these things, and look what mess it's caused because we don't talk about it.
Yeah.
And, yeah, so that's what I wanted to bring to this podcast, was real conversations, real stories, and how we overcome or are overcoming things, because that's also real.
Well, and I think even my late husband, I remember, I didn't have, as I like to call them now, money dates where we can have conversations about our money, because he would always be like, beans and rice and rice and beans. I'm like, oh my gosh, like, seriously. So he would get paid every 2 weeks. And so that first week, he would just like, we would go, we love to like host friends over. So we would have this fun food spread and all this other stuff. And he would take the kids to buy something on that particular Friday. And he would just, lavish it all out. And then the next weekend it was beans and rice and rice and beans. And we'd have to go through the spending plan. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like it was horrible. Like I absolutely hated talking to him about it because it was like such a high and then such a low. Like it was like,
Right.
oh, we have all this money. No, we have. And whenever you say we didn't have money, that's not actually true. But there was this like, you know, we weren't not able to pay our bills.
Yeah.
But it was like we had all this extra fun money on the first one and then we got none the next week. And so, but it was just again like a high and a low. And
Yeah.
so I just I hated talking about it and it was just ugh. Like I
Yeah.
couldn't
Yeah.
stand it.
No, and who does want to go on an emotional roller coaster with
Yeah.
their money? I mean, that's why people don't talk about it because they're like, let's just spend it and then we'll deal with the consequences later. But it brings so much stress
Yeah.
when we could just kind of like learn to, you know, use the fun money for 2 weeks and not just 1 week.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think there's also so much shame around money. Like you see so many
Yeah.
people like shaming us about it. And so I think there's a lot of that. I mean, even when I was like grieving, I had like eight to $10,000 credit card bills because I was buying stuff just because I wanted to. And you don't tell people that. Like
Yeah.
and because we weren't having conversations with my parents and because I didn't have anyone to really talk to about what I was doing, there was like still there you're hiding it and you didn't want to let people know. And especially because, here I am teaching personal finance and I'm
Yeah.
spending all of this money and I'm like, what is wrong with me? Like, but that's the thing, like we don't realize that there are so many more thoughts. It's so important to understand the like how to do stuff, but there's so much more to the why. And that's why these
Mm.
stories of like understanding it is what thoughts are running the show in the background.
Yeah, 100%. Digging into that why. Why are we doing it? What do we wanna do?
Yeah.
Um, and like I said, bringing that awareness, then we have the ability to actually make the changes that we want to live the lifestyle that we do wanna live.
Yeah.
And bringing shame, yeah, that's a big thing in our society, right? Having shame about spending money or not spending money.
Yes.
Um, yeah, we just need to let people live where however they wanna live.
Yeah.
Whether they wanna spend it or not, that's up to them. Um, but that's something I think definitely needs to change. So how do you think this all transferred to your children?
Yeah, so one of the things that I definitely see both of my kids have very different money personalities. And I think that some of us come from a personality. I think it's what we like to do. My Even my sister and I have very different personalities. Like for me, if I went shopping and you gave me $100, I'm gonna get 5 pairs of jeans, where my sister's gonna buy $100 pair of jeans. And I'm seeing that with my children also. My older one loves Lego sets, so he likes to buy, even though he's like 17, he's obsessed with the Lego sets.
They're pretty
Where
cool.
my other son is like, nope, he would rather nickel and dime it away on candy. He's like that, those bigger things, no, don't have any interest to him. Um, but with my older one, I've had to start having more conversations about things. I remember one day he called me and he's like, there's a soccer ball that he wanted to buy and it was like $40. And he's like, if I spent $40 on a Lego set, I wouldn't have any problem with that. And I'm like, well, that's just because this is the cost. And you're kind of like, I could get a cheaper ball for $10. I could, instead of like $40, it's kind of like this, like, why do I want to do it? And so I just asked him, I'm like, why do you want the $40 ball? And he goes, And I don't even know what his reasons were. I mean, he just said it was a higher quality ball. It was, it's going to hold the air better. And I'm like, okay, so what's your problem? He's like, I don't know. And I'm like, yeah, it's because you just hadn't thought about that. You just think you have to get the cheaper balls. Like
Mm,
you can't go and like do something a little more lavish for yourself. And I'm like, well, as long as you have your bills paid, which I do make him, he has to pay for his gas and his soccer. As long as you have that, then this is what you want to spend your money on. That's totally fine. And he's just like, oh. And I'm like,
that's
it's
so
so
funny.
interesting to just see him like physically react to. It was hard for him to part with his money. So
Yeah, even on something that he enjoys doing.
yeah, yeah,
And I think it's great to have those conversations like, okay, well, one, why do you want the ball? And what
hmm
do you think's holding you back?
yeah, yeah,
I think that's really awesome. And those are the conversations that we need to be having. And I think, obviously we can only have them if we become aware and we start talking about, you know what, guys, we've messed up. I mean, I started this business because I messed up with
yeah.
money. I mean, we usually can take our pain and help somebody else,
Right.
right? So if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't be here today.
Yeah.
So but talking about it and even talking about when I've closed my business and things like that, because stuff happens. And it's not necessarily because, maybe I didn't do anything wrong with my money or not put it the right places or whatever that may be. Sometimes things just happen outside of our control.
What
So how
I
Go
also think
ahead.
it's important not to use the word right or wrong because sometimes we don't even know what right and wrong is. Like, it's always, I feel like we have always done the best that we can at that particular moment with the knowledge that we have. And obviously, when you like fast forward and you're like, well, that didn't work out very well. And it's like, yeah, well, with the resources you had, that was the best that you could do. And so I think it's also even just changing our own mindset and the way that we look at the past decisions that we've made can also make a big difference too.
That's very true. That's very true. So, how do you think when did you come I have to change this pattern? When did you come to that realization?
Um, it slowly happened. Like, I think it was so for me, when I was seeing those credit card bills coming up as fast as they were, I was like, "Oh, something's got to happen here." Um, because I had the funds to pay it off, but I was also just going through because of my husband passing away. We did have life insurance, and my financial advisor's like, "You're spending way too much," and I'm like, "Ugh." So that was probably more um, what triggered me to get started on it. But I also just didn't understand like what like I I knew that I should be better with my money, but I didn't know how to get better with my
Mm.
money. And so when I actually my path was learning how to be a life coach, and I didn't even know what a life coach was. I thought whatever. Um, but the training actually taught me how to a well, actually, I learned that I was an emotional shopper. Like, I
Mm.
was spending to feel better. Even though I was doing it, I didn't consciously know that that's what I was doing. I was like, "Oh, now that makes sense why I have, like, a whole stack of clothes in my closet and I'm not even wearing them." Or I was really good at buying stuff online and then just buying them and never doing anything with them. So once I learned how to do that, that's when I was able to go, okay, so there's something here with my grief. I have to know how to do my grief. And then the more that you get into um, the coaching world or personal development, you start to go, oh, so there's not only things I say about myself there are these beliefs that I have about money too that still have to do with the way that I talk to myself. And then it's just like, it just like opens the world up to like all sorts of, why am I not working out? Why am I eating this much? Why am I drinking this much? They are all the same. And there's some kind of belief in here or some kind of
Mhm.
emotion that we're trying to avoid.
That is so true. We are trying to avoid emotions, and I think that's a point. Like, we are trying to avoid an emotion
Yep.
because we don't wanna feel pain or uncomfortable or deal with, you know, our past behaviors, things like that, and, that's a really good point, and I think that's a great place to also, close this podcast, give people something to ponder about. So thank you so much for being here, and thank you all for listening. And, oh, Tina, how can they get a hold of you?
Yeah, so I have an Instagram page that I'm most active on. It's at Widow's Wallet on Instagram.
Okay, great, and we'll have all that information, below the podcast as well. Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to Your Money on Purpose podcast. If you got value out of this episode, I would be forever grateful if you would leave a review and then hit that subscribe button wherever you listen to your podcast so that you never miss an episode. Thank you again for being here, and until next time, remember, money is just a tool that we get to use to live out our purpose.